All right, this is part two of comma rules. This one's going to be a lot shorter, but I wanted to break it in two because sometimes YouTube likes to smash up videos and do all sorts of weird stuff with it. So I thought two parts would actually be kind of a good idea. Um, in the last video, we ended with subordination rule one. Again, if you have an incomplete idea, you can use one of those words in the middle of rule one to add that incomplete idea into a sentence. And when you use this format, you actually don't have to punctuate it in any way. Now, I've had a couple of people get hung up on this real quick. Let me do a quick example with you. Let's say I did this. I went to the lighthouse after hold on, let me think for a minute. I'm usually pretty good with this stuff. I went to the lighthouse after I ate my hot dog. Some people get confused with this. Let me explain why. I ate my hot dog is a complete sentence. This is kind of weird because for subordination, you have to have you have to have an incomplete sentence coming after the conjunction there, right? Well, I went to the lighthouse after I ate my hot dogs. Kind of looks like there's an independent clause coming after that, right? There's a trick to this. I ate my hot dog is a complete sentence. After I ate my hot dog is not. You can't just say after I ate my hot dog. That's not a complete idea. There isn't. And if you're going to say something like after or although or because, you need to have something coming before it. There's a logic there. And if you don't have a complete sentence coming before that, it makes it incorrect. It makes it incomplete. So as long as you're using one of those words, even if you have a complete sentence following, it still turns it into a dependent clause. It's not the most important thing in the world. You don't necessarily have to completely understand that idea right now, but I did want to go ahead and address it because there's always a few students who ask that question. So in this case, I went to the lighthouse after I ate my hot dog works for this rule. And again, I'll put that down there as well. Number two always throws everyone off. It's very strange, but if you'll just follow along with me for a minute, you'll find it makes more sense than it first appears. Everybody always is like, wait a minute, you can begin a sentence with a word like but, or after, or although, or as. You've probably had some English teachers tell you never start a sentence with one of these words. That is technically not true. You can start a sentence with one of those words. But you have to understand how the comma works. And the comma is what makes this correct. What your teachers were trying to do was to get you to completely simplify your language and to avoid the issue altogether. That is simply not good enough. You need to understand this rule because it lets you use more complex sentences. Again, complex sentences make you look intelligent. Complex sentences make you look like you know what you're doing. Therefore, I want you to know how this rule works. Let's do an example. If you have one of these words in the beginning, after, although, because, when, if, since, or as, if you have a dependent clause, and again, if you put one of those words in front of a complete sentence, it makes it a dependent clause. If you put a comma after that incomplete idea, and then start it with a complete sentence, or follow it with a complete sentence, you will have a perfectly grammatically correct sentence. Here's an example. After I ate my hot dog, comma, I went to the lighthouse. Do you guys see how that works? That's one that actually does make you think that if I simply put commas where I pause, I might get it right. That is not correct. It doesn't always work, as you saw in number one. Let's do another example. Although, let's say, although I jumped off a cliff, comma, I survived the fall. One more just because. Because I jumped off the cliff, comma, I died. Yeah, sometimes it's good to just simplify it a little bit. These are the commas. These are the comma rules. What I want you to do is when you write, especially when you're writing your long paper, write it with this handout in your hand. And instead of going back and trying to check all of your sentences, it might be best to just go and add some of these sentences to your work which is already existing. It works very well because you know the sentences you write with these words are going to be correct because you have the guide and you know the words and you see how they should be punctuated. We may need to do some practice on the difference between the independent clause and the dependent clause. But let's do a quick exercise in this discussion forum. What I want you to do is in the discussion forum that this video is housed in, I want you to reply with your own example of each of these rules. It can be anything. You can write about anything you want. Just make sure you follow the rules and you punctuate them correctly. That means you need to reply to this video with at least 5 sentences. You don't even have to connect. I just want to see that you understand the logic. Next week, we're going to talk about this and we will review what we've come up with. And if there are any big questions, I will work with you then. By the end of the week, I'm going to want you to produce a big paragraph that uses all of these rules logically and correctly, and I will grade it. Now, if there are any major issues or any confusion, feel free to try to get in touch with me. Feel free to ask questions because, like I said, this is kind of difficult if you don't work with it every day. Me, I'm a writer. I live and breathe this stuff. But for someone who doesn't work with grammar every day, this is a good entry point to it. This makes it easier. With that, I'm going to wrap these videos up. I hope you guys have a lovely weekend. Make sure you respond to this video with the assignment so that we can have a nice big discussion with it on Monday. Thank you very much, and I'll see everyone soon.